Hey, gang. Hey, everybody. Got a few people on already. Sorry I'm a minute late here. Want to say hi to everybody. First of all, let me know if you can hear me okay. And we'll pick up the guitar, too. We'll pick up the guitar as well. And we'll play that just a little bit. Audio okay. Nemo Unknown says audio's okay. Good. I'm going to assume that that's good. Let me say hi to everybody. Frank 5151, Osman 5151. Hello. Nemo Unknown. Hello. Robbie Love. Hello. McDon BR. Hello. Good morning. TBA. Good morning to you as well. Ron Shack. Good to see you. Good to see everybody here. David Smith, Mike DR, and of course Matt. Good to see you. So a lot of people on already. Okay, so today we're going to talk about modes and talk about who is better. I think that's just going to kind of be fun because, like, nobody. There's a lot of these guys who I think, or gals, although I think most of the comparisons will be to guys, where there's no right answer. Right? You got to come on you got to come up to your own conclusions. I posted a poll this morning about who's got that signature tone, who's got your favorite tone. I think it was Santana, Stevie Ray Vaughan, David Gilmour. I think there was one other person and somebody else. Write in your own. And as of this writing, David Gilmour was leading that one. But lots of good suggestions for what other people said. Some people said the Clapton woman tone, which is kind of what Santana's sound was derived from to a certain extent. He took it a different way as well. Brian May. Nobody said Brian May yet, but he certainly has a signature sound. How come no Clapton? Because he didn't make the cut. I mean, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, none of those guys got on. Jimi Hendrix certainly has a signature sound. Jimmy Page on Led Zeppelin. You got to cut it somewhere. There's only so many you can add. YouTube lets you add 4. So, topic today, Elf, is who is better or what is better. And so we'll have a lot of fun. And the the lesson topic is just a bit about the modes. So we'll talk a little bit about the modes first, I think, and then we'll do the who's better, and then we'll move on. So I don't expect this to be anything definitive, but what I want to do is just give you kind of an intro to how at least there's a couple of standard ways of thinking about the modes, and then quiz you a little bit and play a little bit. All right. So that's the idea. Let's see if we can warm up with a little funky playing and see how that sounds. Hopefully you can hear that backing track. Okay, so just a little fun there, but the point of it was that you can play lots of different things, and over that was just a basically an E7 vamp, right? That's all that was. So there's a ton of different things that you can play over that, from the D major scale to the E minor pentatonic, to the to the E. You could play the E Mixolydian too, right? So there's lots of different options that you have. And one of the ways of thinking about some of those options is to play modes. So that's why I want to do that brief introduction and show you that at least I'm playing a bunch of different things on that one. Some maybe sounded good to you, some maybe didn't sound so good. And I think that's the fun of playing and figuring that stuff out. And modes will give you some options if you're not familiar with them. So now, how did I come to start playing modes? I'll tell you just a brief background on that. When I did it, I learned, like most people did, of when I learned this stuff, I started out by playing minor pentatonics, right? So very common to just think of all the Jimmy Page licks that I played, over. And just think of that blues box pattern. I think all of us understand that. And that's where I started, like most people. And then somebody showed me the major scale. Now, I already knew the major scale because I was just a little tyke doing those Mel Bay books. So I knew the major scale. It just never occurred to me that the major scale was going to work in rock and roll. I don't know why it didn't. And I got hooked on it. And I got hooked on, this is the only thing to know. Like, stop thinking about pentatonics at all. I don't think that's very healthy, by the way, but that's what I did. And so a lot of times as we start and as most of us start out, we try to think of what's the Holy Grail, what's the scale I can just think of, and then I can just wail on it, and I don't have to think about the song. I just think about the scale. That's a bad way of thinking also. But in doing so, I kind of figured out the modes before I even knew what they were. For example, I figured out if you're playing sort of a bluesy sort of progression, a hard blues like a Led Zeppelin, right? Something like that, right? So I figured out that this pattern, the G major scale, worked great over that. It worked great, and I could find out notes that fit pretty well. I had no idea that that was the A Dorian, that I was playing the Dorian mode. None whatsoever. I just knew that the G major scale worked really well. And what I thought was, okay, if I want to sound bluesy, I just play the major scale of the main chord 2 frets down. So in other words, if I'm playing over an A7, I'll just play a G major, and that's going to sound good. And if it was sort of a little bit rock, but a little bit up tempo, I figured out that not the major scale, that didn't sound so good. But the D major scale sounded great. So that was something that sounded cool. So if I was playing over like a funkier type of thing, it was kind of like. That sounded good. I had no idea that that was the Mixolydian, none whatsoever. So later on, somebody showed me that, and I was like, oh, is that all that this is? I was just playing a different major scale. So I came to understand the modes from a totally different perspective, although it turns out that that's one of the ways of thinking about the modes. So let's just take it really simple, and I'm going to show you a couple of things in G, and then we'll just do a quiz, all right? So ultimately, where I think you want to get to is that there are certain tonalities. First of all, let's just start out top level, what a mode is. A mode is just a scale. So when somebody says, I'm going to play mode, I'm going to play modes, it's just a scale, right? And the modes that we know of, the Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, or Phrygian, as some people say, Lydian and Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and did I mention Ionian? I'm not sure if I did. That's the first mode. All of those are modes that are derived from the major scale. You can derive modes from any scale that you want. You can start out with a melodic minor scale and derive the modes from that. So what the modes are, or one way of thinking about the modes, are just starting a major scale from a different point in that major scale. So if we start out with G, let's see if I can just focus on the fretboard a little bit better. Pardon the mess in the background there. So if I start out at G, you know, and some of you know different shapes for the major scale. I'll use the compact shapes. So, maybe it's better to use the maybe it's a little bit better to do that for reasons that I'll get to in a second. So a major scale has that sound to it, and it has a certain interval pattern, right? It has a certain, you know, if we start at G, it's got a whole step, a whole step, a half step, a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, and a half step. A little bit, intonation's a little bit bad there. All right, so if we start the major scale instead of at G, and we pick the same notes, but we started at A, we get the Dorian. It's that's all that's the definition, right? So that's one of the ways of defining it. Another way is, well, let's just kind of go through that. So if I start out with this, so I go from A to B to C to D to E to F sharp to G to A. That's the Dorian mode, okay? Now you can talk about that in terms of half steps and whole step patterns as well, but notice that it's the same notes as the G major scale. All right, so if we do that, you know, if we start with that note, oops. It has a different sound to it because there are different intervals. All right, and it has a different, so because it has a different sound, it's going to be appropriate over different chords. All right, so in this, at least in this primer, in this primer, we can think about it that way. There is another way, and I'm just going to tell you, and that is to think about the if you're playing that interval and starting on A, what would be, instead of thinking about it in relation to the major scale, what happens? Well, it turns out that a Dorian has a flatted third and a flatted seventh relative to the G Ionian, right? So if we're playing a G Ionian, it sounds like this. And if we flat the seventh and we flat the third, we get a Dorian. So it has a different tonality to it, right? So let me stop here for just a second and take some of your questions and see your thoughts here. Dead equals G dead equals Mixolydian. I'm not sure what that means. Oh, Grateful Dead, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Actually, I flat the sixth on the normal Mixolydian scale. Well, you can, but then that's a different scale, right? It's not it's not Mixolydian. It's something else. It's a different scale. And that's fine. That's cool. If you flat the sixth, that's kind of getting more like, you know, you're getting more toward Phrygian or something. Okay. Let's see. It's just a major scale played over a different tonal center, right? So Citizen B, that's how I started thinking of it. All right. I like to look at the, TBA says, I like to look at the modes as a pentatonic, major and minor according to the mode with extra notes added. Okay, that's another way of looking at it. And what we're going to find out is that many of the major modes sound the same when you play the major pentatonic over them. And the minor modes have a similar sort of thing as well. So let's talk about then what are these different modes, right? So the Dorian, if we're going to play the Dorian mode associated with, I'm sorry, the Dorian is associated with the second, and it sounds, like this. But let's just play the G Dorian. So we'll play the G Ionian, sounds like this. Okay, the G Dorian. And I'm going to play a minor chord here for reasons that I'll get to in a second. The G Dorian sounds like this. It's the same key as F, F major, and it sounds like this. Okay, the Phrygian is the same as E flat major, okay? It shares the same notes. So G Phrygian sounds the same or has the same notes as the E flat major scale. That's an exotic sounding one, right? Yeah, it sounds a lot like the harmonic minor. And in fact, some people sometimes sharp I think it's the fifth, or is it the third? I don't know which one it is, but they sharp it for that chord that's over. It's like the over that four chord. All right, so there we go. So that's the Phrygian. Is that the Lydian would be like the D major scale. So that would work maybe over a major seventh chord. Oops. Right. Now the Lydian is interesting. It has that raised fourth, and because of that raised fourth, it gives it kind of an airy feel to it. A lot of people feel that works. All right. Yeah, so David Smith says a harmonic minor is a minor with a major seventh. Yes, that's one way of looking at it. It's not the only way of looking at it. Yep. Yeah, and Satch uses it. The Lydian works really well over sort of raised chords, so suspended seconds or sharp 11ths and stuff like that. Okay, so let's see. Let's see here. Yeah, so the Lydian is a raised fourth, but if we're going to play G Lydian, it's the same key as D major. Oops. All right, so that's Lydian. All right, the next one is Mixolydian. And Mixolydian is the major scale with a flatted seventh. So if we flat the major scale, so instead of that, we're playing, right? So with G, it's the same as the key of C. All right? Because G is the fifth of C, as we'll find out. So that's another way as we're thinking about this, how that works. Okay, so just a couple of more here. So we did the Mixolydian. We're going to do the next one, which is Aeolian. Okay, Aeolian is the same as the natural minor scale. So the natural minor scale, so if we play G minor, for example, that will work. But what is the relative major key of G minor? It's B flat major, right? So all right, so there we go on that one. If we think about it relative to the G major scale, we're flatting the third, we're flatting the sixth, and we're flatting the seventh. All right, so those are the three flats. Now the last one is Locrian. Okay, and the Locrian mode has just a boatload of flats relative to the major scale. It's got a, according to the, the Locrian works well over like diminished chords, or better yet, even half diminished chords, so minor seventh flat 5 chords. So it's got that flatted fifth in there as well. So it's got, that's the thing that's different about Locrian. Locrian has a flatted fifth. So if we think of chords now there's 2 steps to getting to use the modes, I think, from here. One, at least for me, one is we've got knowledge of it from both sides. Like, yeah, you can think of the Dorian in G as coming from the F major scale. All right. But you can, I forgot to say Locrian would be associated with the A flat major scale. So it sounds somewhat like the Phrygian, but it's a little bit different because of that flatted fifth. All right. So a couple of things to do before we get to playing over these modes. The first one, I think, is what David Smith is doing, and that is he's associating these modes with the sound of chords. Now, how do we do that? Well, one way that we do that is we can harmonize the major scale. So if we play harmonic chords, and we can play either sevenths or triads. Let's play triads here. So I'm sorry, let's play sevenths. So if we're playing seventh chords, like associated with the 1 chord, the G, would be a G major seventh. Okay. Associated with the 2 chord would be the minor seventh, A minor seventh. With the 3, it would be a minor seventh as well. With the 4, the C would be a major seventh. With the D, the 5th would be a dominant seventh. With the 6th, it would be a minor or a minor seventh. And with the 7th, which is an F sharp, I'm going to play it down here because it's really hard to finger this one, for me anyway, is a half diminished chord. And of course, we're back to the major. So if we think about this, the first mode, Ionian, is associated with a major chord, a major sounding chord, right? A major seventh. The second mode, Dorian, is associated with a minor chord. A lot of people get confused about this because they say, oh, well, Dorian isn't based off of the major scale. It's a minor mode. Well, it works over a minor chord, right? It works over that 2 chord really well, but it's really associated with the second degree of the major scale. All right, the Phrygian is associated with that 3 chord, right? Which is a minor seventh. The 4th, Lydian, associated with that 4 chord. All right. And so that's a major seventh. So major seventh chords are flexible that way. You can play that. The 5th, that D7, that's a 7th chord. Mixolydian works great over that 7th chord. All right. And of course the minor over the 6th chord. And over that minor 7th flat 5 chord, we'll play the Locrian mode, right? So all right. So anyway, so that's another way of thinking about it. When you hear a chord, you can play a mode over that chord. And so here's where the flexibility comes in, I think, with the modes. When you're thinking about what do I play over a minor 7th, you've got essentially a bunch of choices. So before we go into that, one more thing I want to say is that we've got a bunch of modes, right? We've got 7 modes. The major modes are associated with major chords. Those would be Ionian, associated with the first. All of a sudden they got louder, right? The Lydian, associated with a major, you can use a Lydian mode over that. Or you can use a Mixolydian mode. Now, Mixolydian mode doesn't work great over major 7ths, but it works. So those are the major mode choices. If you hear a chord that's basically a minor flavored chord, you use one of the other modes. All of the Dorian, the Phrygian, and the Aeolian all have flatted thirds. So you can use that. And if you hear an exotic chord, like something that's got a flatted 5th, you can go ahead and use the Locrian you can use the Locrian mode to do that. So that's one way of thinking about the modes. It's not the only way of thinking about it, but I think it's kind of a useful thing. So let's see. Depeche Mode. What about Depeche Mode? Anyway, so I tend to not be much of a person who thinks in terms of modes. I think in terms of, if at all, I think in terms of chords that I'm playing over. And I really tried to force myself to do that over and over and over. Yeah. And I just think it makes a lot more sense to me. And I think it's really helped my play a lot more when I've focused on chords more than modes. But let me do, I have a few quizzes for you. So let me, Elf Hermes got a comment here before we go on. The closed fingering of the major scale lays over one chord shape. Spread finger travels up the fretboard is a bit. What do you think of multiple cage chord shapes as your fingers go up using that one? I'm not sure I understand the question. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. I think in terms of caged, you've got to, I think just in terms of seeing the notes, I think that helps to understand where the roots are, right? So for this, for example, if you're going to play pentatonics over this G, you really need to know that there's a G here and a G here. So you can play the closed stuff if you want, and that's fine. But you can. Oops. I'm kind of looking at all of those roots and playing a lot by ear, clearly. Hey, Mitch, good to see you. Good to see you. If it sounds good, play it. That's it. And a la mode, yeah. So I've got a couple of quizzes here, and let's just try these and see what we get. So it feels like my tone got more trebly all of a sudden. Not sure why. All right, so let's try this one. So okay, so now we're going to try and apply the chords to the modes, right? So this one was a 2-chord sequence, kind of sounded like Tom Petty, right? Okay, so that's the A chord. That's an A. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not Tom. Does sound like Tom Petty, but it's sorry. That's an A minor. To D. So it's A minor to D. So let's see. So what mode is going to work over that? Just a quick quiz. What mode is going to work on that? I tend to not think in modes. I tend to think of this as a certain key, but you can think in terms of modes. I think most people would start out by saying, okay, it's a modal tune because it starts in A minor. So it's going to be an A minor mode, right? Yeah. So the two choices, I think, are A minor, which is Aeolian, and A Dorian. Then there's also Phrygian, right? But that's usually a third choice. Usually ordinary chord sequences don't really work. So let's try both, all right? So the first thing, so here's just at least for me, what sort of modes are going to work. I just got to try them. So let's try Aeolian, right? So it's Aeolian would be, oops. All right, so let's see. Okay, so Aeolian doesn't work. That A minor doesn't work. It works okay over the A, but over the D, it doesn't work, you see, because it's got this flatted third of the D. It's got this F, but a D needs that F sharp. So let's check out the Dorian here. I'm going to turn this down just a little bit so we can hear. Yeah, so there you go, right? So at least for me, again, it comes down to thinking about those chords. Because when you think about the D and you think about that F note, that's going to clash with that F sharp, which is the key note in a D major, right? The whole difference between minor and major is one of the key points to playing. Now, yeah, definitely total Santana, right? Yeah, and that's right, Ron. So you can think of that as, hey, these are just triads in the key of G. Because what's the 2 chord in G? If we were doing 7th chords, it'd be this minor 7. But if we're just doing triads, it's a minor. And what's the 5 chord? If we're doing 7th chords, it'd be a D7. But here we're just doing triads, it's the D. So if the 5 chord is a D, the 2 chord is, you can think of A minor as a 2 chord and D as a 5 chord. It never actually ends up at the tonic of G, but you can think of it as key of G. Excellent. If you learn a major scale, then just think of that when you start on the note 1 of that scale, it's Ionian, 2 is Dorian. That's right. That's right. And that's how when I was doing modes, that's how I would do it. I would find the parent key. I would say, oh, the 2 chord, A minor is playing the part of the 2 chord in this play, if you will, right? In this TV show, A minor is playing the part of the 2 chord. So the 2 chord fits into that G major scale. Now you have options, right? You have options. One thing I do want to show you and why the minor pentatonic is so good is that check out the difference. right? Here is the minor pentatonic superimposed. Did you notice it didn't have that third? Didn't have that, right? Of the Dorian, right? Or of the minor, the Aeolian. So the interesting thing is that the Aeolian and the Dorian sound the same when you take out a minor pentatonic, just takes out the notes that you can mess up on. Now that's good and bad, because it takes out, it makes it safer to play, which is great. Hey, Phil, great to see you. Great to see you. So, yeah, so it makes it safer to play, but it also takes out the flavor that you get from that D chord, right? It takes out that third of the D chord, which is a key flavor that you might want to play. So play it safe or play it a little bit dangerously. All right, let's take the next one. So that one was Dorian, right? A minor to D, that's Dorian. That works. Okay, let's try the next one. What's the next one? You should recognize this one. Okay, that one you should recognize if you saw my video yesterday. It's just B minor. To A. To G. To B minor. Okay, so the question is, what mode do I play? You know, this is just kind of a fake question because you can play lots of different things, right? But whatever, what mode is going to work there? Yeah, and you can always play chord tones. David Smith, you can always play chord tones, right? So I could always play. Right? That works. So we have a few guesses here. D major, Aeolian. Okay, there you go. So Ron, that's right. B Aeolian, if you're playing modes. This is just a B minor, right? Or somebody said D major. That's right. That works. And somebody else said A mixolydian. Well, you don't usually think of this because the starting chord is a B minor. You think of this, it would be a minor. You'd say, how can I call it B and talk about it being a mode? So it'd be Aeolian, which is D major. All those, if you think about D major, right? The B minor is the 6th chord. A, if we're playing triads, A is the 5 chord, and G is the 4 chord. So that all works, right? Okay. Do we really need modes? Did the classic rock guys use modes, AC/DC? I think they didn't. Do you really need modes? I think the answer is no, you don't. But you don't need to play the guitar either, right? So do modes maybe help a little bit? Yeah, I think so. I think if I'm thinking of a chord that I want to play, say I just have an isolated minor 7th chord, I can think about the modes to think about what tones I want to generate over that chord, right? Or if I have a G7, I can think about what tones or what sounds I want to play over that G7 chord. All right. It just gives you kind of a different mood, and it's kind of flexible. So it's nice to have. It's nice to be able to pull out. And I think at the end of the day, you really have to think about it over a chord or a sequence of chords and say, do I want a certain modal sound to this or what have you? All right. So anyway, or that's one way that you can think about it. All right, let's move on to the next one. That was an easy one. Let's do 2 more, or let's just do this last. Yeah, let's do this one. This is a good one. So this is kind of like Tom Petty, okay? Okay, so that one is like A to B. I'm playing B with an A bass, but so what do you think? A to B. So if we want to say there's a modal tune in A, how would we put it? A what? That's right. Sounds like Here Comes That Girl. I think we're off the modes. That's right, GMAC. It's A Lydian, because you can think of A as the 4 chord and B as the 5 chord of an E major scale, right? So and it kind of works. All right. Last one. Yeah, so that's Lydian. And you can hear it has that sort of airy feel to it. And I think once you get used to sort of playing modally, you can kind of pull these out once in a while, for just how you want a certain thing to sound. All right, if you want to sound spooky, you can pull out the Phrygian or Locrian. All right, last one here that we're going to do, and then we'll get into our discussion. This one's a bit of a tricky one. All right. Okay. Yeah. So before we get on to this one, and this one's a bit trickier, Love Guitars is asking, hey, Mark, thanks. If not modes, then how did classic rock guys learn to write songs and solos? So I think that they did understand modes, right? Because they knew that they could play different major scales over different things. And so they know what chords fit into a major scale and what chords they can change in terms of color chords. But I think also many of the classic rock guys knew pentatonics really well, and they knew the blues. And so they're just kind of playing out of the blues. And like, for example, in if you're used to playing gospel, that 3 chord is often a major, and which is different, right? So people would use that, right? Or if people knew Stormy Monday, they would know that progression there. You don't have to know that that's a 2/5 to know that sort of thing works when you're composing. So I think a lot of it was by ear. And I tell you, the minor pentatonic, and then Leslie West and some others, but I think Leslie West in particular brought them, and a few other people were playing more countrified sort of rock, like the band, brought the major pentatonic in as well. So you combine those two, you can do a heck of a lot. All right. Well, I won't hold you in suspense. That last one, this right here, is an F to a G to an A. So the trick about this is you can't simply use one mode to do that one. You have to change, because you're playing over what sounds like the David Gilmour progression, right? Or that Stairway to Heaven progression. Stairway to Heaven would be the oops, I'm sorry. Right, which is really the same as the Gilmore progression that we played before. So that A minor or A Aeolian or A minor pentatonic all work great over those chords. But, and it seems like you're going there, but then you hit an A major. So you can't really play that A minor. It's going to sound bad. So you got to switch over to something like A Mixolydian or A Ionian or A major pentatonic to do that, right? So you can mix the A minor pentatonic and A major pentatonic. So check this out. So we'll just do that, right? So let's try that. Okay, so major and minor. Oops. Where'd my sound go? All right, so even though you're playing modes or whatever, and this I think is, to me, is the biggest part of the lesson of modes, is that just knowing modes isn't enough. You got to really understand what the changes are, what the chord changes are. And if you think about chord tones, at least to me, you won't go wrong. You know, if you're playing an A major scale over an A minor, that doesn't make sense. We all know that. So don't do that, right? Right? So you're going to hit some sour notes. But if you think about the chord tone that you're playing over, whether it's a seventh or a major or a minor, I think you're in good shape. And according to Joe Pass, there's only 3 types of chords: majors, minors, and seventh chords. So I listen to Joe Pass. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And you can, you know, there's so many different things that you can do. I was listening to a guy yesterday. I wish I could remember his name. And he talked about making this scale work. I'm not kidding you. It was on a podcast. And he talked about making this scale. I don't even know what the hell this scale is, but it's, check it out. What kind of scale is that? You can see it's kind of like a whole tone scale. It's very similar. It's very similar to that, but it's got some weird notes in it. Weird stuff. But he made it totally work in the song. I was shocked. So anyway, you can do it. And then he showed how all these triads were embedded in. I don't know. Beyond what I wanted to know for theory, but it was pretty cool. All right. Well, it's not chromatic, Elf. It's not chromatic. It's whole tone. It's whole, half, 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 whole, half, 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 whole, half, half, half. That's what it is. So the imperial scale. Now it's some composers. I can't remember the composer, but he wrote a bunch of different things. A whole tone scale is one of them, of things that were not completely transposable. So you couldn't transpose them into all keys. And the reason is because there's a lot of borrowed notes that work in different keys. Anyway, that's way beyond what, that you're not going to use that in rock. So yeah, he was a fusion player. He was a fusion player, and he played with Zappa a lot, with Zappa's son, with Dweezil. Anyway, for what it's worth, which I think is not all that much. Not for me, anyway. It's fun to listen to stuff like that, but anyway, it is what it is. All right. So let's move on to the more fun stuff. We should do this more, I think. So this is who or what is better. And I've got a whole bunch of these, so maybe we'll do a couple more later. So this is not really who's better. This is really just who's your favorite. And so in order to play this game, You have to say who it is, and you have or what it is, and then you have to say why. Okay. A weights and measures joke. Oh, the imperial scale. Okay. Sorry, Crow Black. I thought you were talking about like the Yellow Jackets. They have a song called Imperial Strut. Robin Ford's awesome on it. Check it out. All right. So Led Zeppelin used that scale. Yeah, probably. All right. So for example, if I said Stones or the Beatles, you would have to say who you preferred and why. And then we'll just kind of take everybody's comments and read some of them, okay? Okay. So let's start out with an interesting one. Keith Richards or Pete Townsend? Keith Richards or Pete Townsend? Which one and why? Keith Richards or Pete Townsend? Keith Richards or Pete Townsend? G-Max says neither. Wow. I'm Anonymous says because of his riffs, Keith. Mike DR says Keith because he has more grit. A lot of people are saying Keith. Just more unique personality. Really? I don't know about that. Maybe more well known. Keith because of Give Me Shelter. Townsend, too many epic pieces. Townsend is rockier. Yeah, and I think in some ways he was. More tuneful. Townsend better songwriting. Keith did more drugs, more rock and roll, says Sam W. Okay, Frank, see you later. Townsend because of his acoustic playing, I'm Anonymous, basically says. Keith because he digs in more. Really? Do you know anybody who went more nuts and put it all out there than Townsend? Maybe Hendrix. Keith been all right. So I think we're going to move on. I love this topic. We got different things here, catchy ideas that Townsend had. Different, maybe more interesting chord voicings. But Keith Richards, nobody has said this, although I think Sam kind of alluded to it. One person told me he thought Keith Richards was the best guitar player ever because he figured out how to be totally stoned and totally out of it on stage and just be able to play with one finger and pull it off, right? Because he did all the tuning. He changed everything to G tuning or D tuning. I don't know if I like that idea, but it's an interesting comment. All right. So it looks like most people preferred Keith. So we'll move on. Okay. All right. Here's one that's going to be fun. Page or Clapton? Jimmy Page or Eric Clapton? Jimmy Page or Eric Clapton? And you have to say why. TBA says Page because of better tunes. Better songs. Led Zeppelin versus Eric Clapton's body of work. Both good bodies of work, but I got to give the nod to Zeppelin, I think, on that one. Page was all over the place. Page, the Rain song. Page just because. More rockish. Page has feel. Clapton because he's a better player. No quarter. Eric because of blues. Okay. So I think that's kind of how I think about it. If you think about straight ahead blues, probably Clapton has the edge. Clapton also had these iconic sounds. Page had his iconic sounds too, but Clapton had some different sounds for sure. And he was probably a little bit ahead of the game, but Page, a lot of people thinking Page for sure. Page because of his bell bottoms. All right. Both are awesome, right? I mean, how can you go wrong? You got to pick one. Easy to do. All right. So it looks like most people are giving a nod to Page, which is kind of interesting. That's where my heart is. I learned Jimmy Page first. That's kind of where it is for me. Great riff writer for sure. Okay. All right, here's one that maybe some people won't know. But let's go for it anyway. Jerry Reed or Glenn Campbell? Jerry Reed or Glenn Campbell? Many people are like, who cares, huh? Jerry Reed because he was cornier. Jerry Reed because he was cornier. Campbell because of his Jimmy Webb songs. Well, Campbell could sing. Oh, so did Jerry Reed. The Bird. I like that one. Jerry Reed had that real unique style, but you know what? Glenn Campbell could do that too. They both played banjo, and so they could pull it on. Johnny Marr versus who? I have him in here somewhere. Sam. All right. Reed. Campbell because he was on the Wrecking Crew. Yeah, so Campbell was playing a lot of stuff. Yep. You've never heard of it, Citizen B. If you've never heard of Jerry Reed, you got to Google him and listen to him. You're going to get a lot of corny stuff, but find his instrumental stuff, and it's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. Like, do it with if you find Jerry Reed and Roy Clark together, or Jerry and Chet Atkins, it's going to be incredible stuff. You're going to have a lot of stuff that's fun. Yeah, that's right. He wrote Eastbound and Down, and a lot of other stuff. All right, let's move on. Okay. All right, here's an interesting one. Brian May or Neil Schon? Brian May or Neil Schon? And why? Ooh, tough one, huh? I'm Anonymous says Brian May, the riffs and the tone. Brian May for the perm. Sam W., you got it, man. Sardella Julio says Neil style. GMAX says tough one, but I go with Sean because of all the great songs. May sounds awesome. May song, sound, tone. Two hearts, says Citizen B. Elf says Brian May because his guitar work was really inventive. It certainly was. Both are kind of have this melodic style, yeah? So that's why I thought it was kind of an interesting comparison. They have some similar style. Personally, I probably prefer Brian May when I intellectualize it. Well, actually, when I intellectualize it, I think Brian May is probably better. But Neil Schon, I listen to probably more. Both had help. Yeah, they both did. Everybody in the world has help. Yeah, Neil Schon played with Santana, right? JT, hey, I'm doing well. All right, let's see. So I think that one's a toss-up, but I think more people are kind of going with Brian May on that one. Where do they put? Oh, I already knocked that one. Okay. Okay, here's a weird one. Joe Perry or Peter Frampton? Joe Perry or Peter Frampton? Freddie Mercury versus Steve Perry. Robbie Love says, yeah. If this weren't the Guitar Channel, we'd talk more about that one. Yeah, Fenderman 2073. You know your Jerry Reed. That's a great one. The TBA one says Frampton. Lots of people giving the nod to Frampton. Joe Perry, his sound is so rock and roll. Joe Perry's hard to compare to, I think. Perry plays like Page, but he's a lot funkier, I think, Ron. I think he gets that funky stuff that really works, right? It's rock, but it's funk rock. I don't know what it is. There's something like, listen to Walk This Way. You got to really play funky to get that. It's not easy to play. Yep. Most people giving Frampton on those. Yeah. But Joe Perry, one of my faves. I Peter Frampton, certainly one of my faves. So that's an interesting one. All right, we'll move on. Okay, so let's just do a couple more here. Maple or rosewood? Maple or rosewood? Maple or rosewood? So GMAX says rosewood because just feels better. Robbie Love says rosewood. TBA says maple because that's what I have. That's good. So this is the fretboards, right? So when we say maple or rosewood, we're talking about the fretboard. This one has a maple fretboard. A lot of people will say maple neck. Don't do that. A lot of guitars have maple necks, but rosewood fretboards, right? Fender guitars can have maple necks, but rosewood fretboards. The fretboard is the top part. All right. And David Smith says ebony. Wasn't a choice, but it's his choice. Paw Pharaoh. How about that? Nobody's saying Paw Pharaoh. Or marble. Anybody play a marble fingerboard? Sounds awful, right? I feel strongly both ways. Rosewood because of my Les Paul. You know, Citizen B, I have a Les Paul that has a maple neck. It's one of those baked maple necks. I love it. Love it. Sounds great. It's harder to tell if rosewood is dirty, that's for sure. Maple a little brighter and snappier. I wonder if that's actually true or if that's an artifact of maple being associated with Fender. Yeah. Micarta. All right. Don't eat Cheetos before you play. Orange fretboard. I don't think anybody wants that. Oh, yeah. Those baked maple necks, they'll stay forever. I'm ambivalent. I like maple necks, but I also like rosewood necks a lot. Rosewood to me is kind of the classic one. I like that better. All right. Okay. Maple or rosewood? Okay. We'll do just a couple of Brad Paisley or Keith Urban? Brad Paisley or Keith Urban? Mirrored fretboard. So McDonald BR, you have the rosewood, okay? On most people do on a Les Paul. Yeah, I have rosewood on my 335. Pays no idea, says Svardello Julio. Paisley all the way, says anonymous. I'm anonymous. Paisley all the way. Great bender. Yeah, I agree. Personally, I like Paisley a lot, but Keith Urban is a heck of a player. Real good emotional player, for sure. He knows what he's doing. Paisley could be a rock star. Paisley is so talented. You know, a lot of Paisley's stuff sounds like Eddie Van Halen to me without the whammy bar, which is interesting because I don't think he came from that. A lot of it, he plays with that right-hand claw stuff. Really good. He's pretty amazing. Yep. Urban if you want to get the ladies. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. I think most of us said Paisley on that one, with a nod to Keith. Keith is a great player for sure. Stupid Boy is a lovely, lovely solo. Great solo. Real epic. That's Keith Urban. And you can hear them both play on Start a Band, which is a fun song. So check it out if you haven't. All right. So Sam W. asked, what about Steve Cropper? Okay. Steve Cropper or Cornell Dupree? Steve Cropper or Cornell Dupree? Who do you choose? Hey, Cloud. Not familiar with Cornell Rainy Night in Georgia Dupree? Cornell Dupree played with a lot of the guys in the early 70s and was on a lot of those songs. He's a jazzier version of Steve Cropper for sure. Yeah, I think more people know Steve Cropper, but Cornell Dupree, you should look him up. He played a lot of R&B, played on a lot of classic R&B stuff. Another guy is Reggie White. So if you listen to stuff like Dobie Gray's Drift Away, that's Reggie White on that. But Brooke Benton's Rainy Night in Georgia, that's Cornell Dupree. I'm trying to think of the sax player. Who's the sax player did Memphis Soul Stew? God, I can't remember his name. King Curtis. King Curtis, Cornell Dupree played with him, and he did his own solo stuff too. A little bit jazzier player. Yeah. Reggie, did I say Reggie Young? Reggie White, I meant. Sorry, man. Who is Reggie Young? I don't even know who that is. Reggie Young's a boxer or something? I don't know. Reggie White. That's right. I think it was Reggie White the second. All right. So let's see. Couple more here. All right. How about this one? Jimmy or Eddie? Jimmy or Eddie? Reggie Young is basketball? That's right. Thank you. Jimmy or Eddie? Cloud says Jimmy. G-Mac says Eddie, my generation. Reggie Young played with Elvis. That's right. David Smith says Jimmy 100%. No Eddie without Jimmy. Well, that's true. But there's no Newton without Galileo. Does that make Galileo more important than Isaac Newton? I'm not sure. I don't think so, personally. All right. Or, there's no Einstein without Newton. Does that make Einstein less important? Maybe. Okay. A lot of people saying Eddie. A lot of people saying Jimmy. I think it's kind of interesting, right? They're very different players, kind of totally out there players. Really went for it. I mean, you watch Jimi Hendrix live stuff. He does a lot of stuff that might not work, and a lot of times it doesn't. Herb Alpert, Chuck Mangione. All right. Personally, Jimmy speaks to me a lot more, but when I was growing up, Eddie did. So I don't know. Yeah, so James, I feel exactly the same way. James says, when I was younger, Eddie, older now, Jimmy. So I feel exactly the same way. When I was younger, Eddie Van Halen was like, I thought if I could play like Eddie Van Halen, I could just keel over and that would be my life. That would be fine. And then later I discovered lots of other things. All right. It would be amazing to hear what Jimmy could do with a Floyd Rose. It would be amazing. Okay. Let's just do one or two more here. Boss or MXR? Boss or MXR? Mike Diarra says, who's my favorite female guitar player? That is a toughie. That's a toughie. I really like Joni Mitchell. I really like Joni Mitchell a lot. Boss, G-Max says. Page versus Van Halen. Well, we did Page versus Clapton. Boss, Springsteen. Nemo Unknown says Springsteen. Most people are saying Boss, are going with Boss. A few people say MXR. I have a real soft spot for James Dickinson says MXR. That Dynacomp, I agree. So I have a soft spot for MXR because those were my pedals when I was growing. I had the Distortion Plus. I didn't have the Rat. How stupid is this? I could have decided to take the Rat pedal, but I decided to get the MXR back in the 70s. I don't know why. But anyway, I got the Distortion Plus, and I had the Phase 90, and I had the Dynacomp. And life was good. And then somebody came in with what was the Small Stone? Or what was the electroharmonic stuff? And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. Yeah. All right. Let's just do one more here. Or oh, here's a fun one. We'll do two more. Vi or Satriani? Vi or Satriani? Regular or Cool Ranch? Analog or digital? That's a good one. But let's go with Vi or Satriani. Spardella Julio says Vi. Vi because of the emotion, says Citizen B. Satch more melodic, says I'm anonymous. Vi, such flair. Easily Vi, he's the master. Satriani is a better player, says McDon BR. El Fermi goes with Vi. He played on some great DIR songs. Satriani for guitar players never got into him. Satriani, says James Dickinson. Satch because of his melody and feel. What I think is interesting is that people can choose one versus the other for a reason that would be the opposite for me. So for me, Steve Vai, I don't like either of their music. I have to say, listen to their stuff. I don't get into it too much, either of their stuff, and I'm not into that sort of play. But I for some reason, Vi can hit me, and Satriani can't. There's nothing that he's done that really like hits me with emotion. Does that mean he's not a great player? Nope, it doesn't mean that. Does not mean that. But somehow Vi can do that for me. And maybe it's just something stupid. Like maybe it's because I saw Crossroads when I was a 15-year-old or 16-year-old and just loved it. Right? I love that ending, this Crossroads. And I saw Vi with Zappa first on his Halloween special in like 1981 or something, 1980. Oh, well. Anyway, it's interesting that they are both sort of, but I don't know if they're buddies, but they grew up near each other. That is interesting. Yeah. Wasn't that fun? The Crossroads movie at the end? That's so cool. So cool. Does anybody know who played the guitar, Ralph Macchio's guitar? I'll give you 10 points if you can get that one. Ry Cooder played on most of it, but who played on the end stuff? You're right. Ry Cooder played a lot of the blues stuff. Ry Cooder, a very underappreciated player. Steve Vai played it at the end. Arlen Roth, the guy behind Hot Licks, not Gatton, but Arlen Roth played his stuff at the end. Yeah, all those classical arpeggios and stuff. Arlen Roth. Yeah. He's the Hot Licks guy. I think he was the guy behind putting together all the Hot Licks. Don't know what happened to him. Don't know what happened to him. Yeah. All right, Nemo Unknown. Thanks for showing up. Let's see. We'll do one last one. I wanted this to be a good one. Vi or Satriani, I think, is a good one. Okay. How about this one? Okay. Here's a tough one. This is a toughie. Stevie Ray Vaughan or Gary Moore? Stevie Ray Vaughan or Gary Moore? Stevie Ray Vaughan or Gary Moore? Robbie Love says Arlen is still around. He was at LI Guitar Show. And that's good to know. Skunk versus Larry Carlton. Yeah, I had a Larry Carlton thing on here. That's a good one, Fender Man. I know who I would vote for. Few people saying SRV. I'm anonymous says SRV, but you got to say why, brothers. Stardello Julio says SRV. Robbie Love says SRV. Love Guitar says Gary Moore, more melodic to me. Sam W says SRV. Nobody's saying why with SRV. There we go. L for me says Stevie Ray Vaughan just stands out, head and shoulders above the rest. Again, that's not a reason. David Smith says Gary Moore, more feel and energy, but love SRV. GMAX says SRV brought back the blues rock thing and really made it popular. That is true. SRV because of his version of Little Wing. That is an interesting way of saying it, Landon. Vaughn took blues to a new level. So did Gary Moore, though, in my opinion. Gary Moore for his touch. Stevie Ray Vaughan made guitar cool again. Okay, that's good. Just cuz. Come on, man. You got to come up with a better reason. Texas style, because of Texas. Well, what about Freddie King? What was he, the Texas Cannonball or something like that? Can't remember. Because he used, hey, bud, cool live stream. Thanks, Ben. Heaviest strings. Yeah, he brought the blues back to rock. Well, they're very different, right? So Gary Moore has a lot of the touch. Gary Moore probably has more technical ability, but Stevie Ray, I don't know. Stevie Ray could make it just flow, right? He used those Albert King licks and just supercharged them. Yeah. Yeah, Gary, have you ever heard Gary Moore? Well, he's dead now. Both are dead, died before their time. Texas Cannonball. Yeah. Stevie was the minor pentatonic guy, right? Whereas Gary Moore, he used the minor pentatonic a lot, but he could play more melodically for sure. Yeah, personally, I think Gary Moore is underappreciated. I think he is another person who brought the. If you think about blues players, I think he stands out there just like Stevie Ray does, and just like the Three Kings do. Eric Gales. Yeah, absolutely. I remember Eric Gales. Stevie Ray practiced nonstop. I suspect Gary Moore did too. I suspect he did too. But Gary Moore could play jazz too. I mean, if I've heard him play jazz, and he was, maybe not the greatest player, but he could really play it. Yeah. All great stuff, right? I don't know. My personal favorite, I like Gary Moore better, but God, I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. I mean, it's just minor pentatonic, right? But he only has to hit that one note. I really like guys who just have to hit one note and you know who they are. Stevie Ray had that. Stevie Ray had that. Yeah. I have a friend who saw Stevie Ray a bunch of times and said he kind of phoned in his concerts. He was up there stoned and just was I won't say what he said he was doing with his left hand, but I think you get the picture. Favorite rhythm guitar player. Yeah. Yeah, Gary Moore definitely had some stuff out there, but his blues playing top notch. Stevie Ray stuck to one style and owned it. Yeah, so I think that's a great reason to pick Stevie Ray, is because he stuck with one thing and he made it work. Yeah, I think that's true. And Gary Moore did more things, but he didn't maybe do them at the pinnacle. So I don't know. It's pluses or minuses. Do you like? I don't know. Like with a guy who everybody admired in the 80s, Steve Morse, right? Great player, clearly a great player, but he's playing safe notes all the time. There's a real weird video of God, I can't remember. Who's the guy with Deep Purple? My God, I'm having a brain fart here. Blackmore, where he's talking about, the guy's now playing with Deep Purple, right? Steve Morse is now playing with Deep Purple, and some of the other folks who play. I think Satriani played with Deep Purple for a while, and Richie Blackmore said, well, it's not as good because, they never play a wrong note. Well, it sounded like jealousy when it came out of his mouth. But there's something to be said for taking chances. Steve Morse, as great as he is, he's not taking any chances. He's playing safe notes all the time. And he can execute like a MFO, but he's playing safe notes. And personally, I like guys who put themselves out there. Larry Carlton puts himself out there. He'll make mistakes. It's really interesting when I read comments about Carlton, people say he never hits a wrong note. That's such bullshit. He hits wrong notes. He tries lots and lots and lots of different notes and tries to make it work. And you got to admire that. He's really improvising all the time. Is that right? Blackmore can barely play anymore. I mean, look, I love Steve Morse. He's a great player. It's just a different philosophy, right? Different philosophy of playing it safe versus playing. And I mean, he goes for it playing safe, right? He goes for it playing safe, but it's a different philosophy. Blackmore can barely play anymore. Huh. Wow, I didn't know that. Pete Townsend, Richie Havens' favorite rhythm players. Sorry, I had to say that. Love both Stevie and Gary, too. Yeah, Pete's a great rhythm player. Pete Townsend and Richie Havens. I had a bunch of his stuff from later. He's just like a folky. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. Morse is a surfer. Is he really a surfer? He grew up in Florida, right? I think so. Alex Lifeson or David Gilmour? To me, that's not even close. But okay, we'll save that one for next time. Who are my biggest influences? GMAC asks, who are my biggest influences? So early on, it was Page. And early on, it was Townsend. Townsend was my first real influence on the guitar. And then in the middle, and then early on, it was Page and Peter Frampton. And then I got into this phase where I was really into two guys, Steve Morse and Steve Howe. I thought if I could play like those guys, that would be it. And then after that, it was guys like Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, and so forth. I didn't get into Hendrix early on, which is a shame because I didn't get into Hendrix until I was like a senior in high school, maybe first year of college. That was when I got into Hendrix, and it's too bad. But I got into the Robin Ford and Larry Carlton stuff pretty early, and then that's how I moved backwards into blues. Yeah, Steve Howe. I mean, that's how I learned how to pick was with Steve Howe and with Steve Morse, because they picked all those notes, and so you have to have a clean picking style, and so that's how I learned how to pick better. And then I unlearned it later, but that's okay. So those are some of my influences. I'm influenced by so many. Wes Montgomery was a big influence on me. I love B.B. King and Freddie King, huge influences. But early on, it was those. First Townsend, then Page, and then that moved into Howe and Morse for a long time. Drew Abbott. Drew Abbott of Bob Seger, Live Bullet. Can't go wrong there. Can't go wrong there. Yeah, David Smith, there's too many to list. Was I influenced by Drew Abbott? Heck yeah. Not very much. But what was interesting to me was that when I started playing when I was in college, I played actually before I started college, and then I played throughout college. I played in a bunch of Motown bands that were around Detroit. And for those guys, I had to learn the styles of the Motown players, and that was tough to do because I thought, oh, this is so boring. It's only like these three chords, and there's nothing to do on guitar. And then you learn what they were doing to make the songs unique. Guys like Joe Messina and Steve Cropper and Cornell Dupree, all those guys. Leo Nicotali, I never knew how to pronounce his name. Little Beaver, I can't remember his first name or his actual name, but all incredible. Yeah. Well, GMAC, I don't know. I don't live in Detroit anymore, so I live out in the boonies, and I was into bluegrass for a long, long time. That's all I played was bluegrass because I could find people who could play it. And I got into it through folk, if you can believe that. So, hey, if you want to play with other musicians, play with folk musicians because number one, you sound good comparatively, generally speaking, and number two, they'll love you. It's just so welcoming in most folk communities, and it's fun, right? It's fun to play music. Yeah, it is. Eddie Hale, thank you, Fenderman. Of course, Fenderman 73 is going to know. J.J. Cale blues with Eric Clapton. Yeah, J.J. Cale, he was the real thing for sure. A lot of people in the 70s did J.J. Cale songs, right? Leonard Skinner, Jay Graydon. What do I think defines the Motown sound? It's heavily orchestrated. It's a thick sound. Backup singers. It's very triad-y sounds. There's not a lot of exotic sounds in there. You'll hear a major seventh once in a while or a minor seventh later on, like in Marvin Gaye. But early on, it's very triad-based stuff. You hear straight minors, majors, and very, very toned down stuff. And in fact, when the a lot of the Smokey Robinson, a lot of stuff written by Smokey Robinson is that way. Just My Imagination, or I think he wrote Boardwalk, Down by the Boardwalk. But yeah, a lot of major stuff. And a lot of the players were playing triads over that, just playing different triads. Yep, James Jamerson and the Funk Brothers. Yeah, Funk Brothers. And then you got the Stax sound, which is more rootsy, right? Stax and Fame Studios, Muscle Shoals, which is more rootsy, a little dirtier sounding. Steve Cropper and the Muscle Shoals, the Swampers, playing out of Fame, and then later out of their own studio at Muscle Shoals. You got Booker T and the MGs out of Stax, and then you got the opposite, which is the sound of Philadelphia, right? Which is the super lush, all the strings and stuff. And I love all that stuff. It's all great. It's all great. I could listen to Backstabbers. That's great stuff, right? The Isleys, all great stuff. How about the Muscle Shoals sound? Oh, well, there's so much that was recorded at Muscle Shoals, right? Dwayne played there for a while. He was on a bunch of those tracks. Yeah, but the Swampers have that funky stuff. Yeah, Blue Eyed Soul for sure. I don't know the players. I don't know their names. I should really. Yeah. David Smith Marvin, I think, was almost entirely a Motown artist. I don't know if he ever played out of Motown. Motown got that funkier sound later when he had like Papa Was a Rolling Stone. I think that's a Motown song. But again, it's got the string arrangements in the background. Stax, you wouldn't hear that. You'd hear a horn arrangement, kind of a little rootsier. Soul Man is a good example of a Stax recording, right? It's a little bit raw. It's a little bit more raw than, say, Just My Imagination, or a Spinner's tune, Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, Hood is Shoals Jameson. Ron says I smoked dope with the Isley brothers back in the day. More power to you, buddy. I was never that lucky. If I was, Mike DR says, if I was going to start a band, what guitar player would you want? Keeping in mind their songwriting ability and singing along with their playing. Oof. Well, boy, so it sounds like, Mike, you want a group that's playing originals. If you want a working band, you should probably, at least if you're living where I am, you should probably play country. Or a Grateful Dead tribute. And for that, you just got to know a shit ton of songs. But with guitar players, I just, I like people who know how to play, how they're versatile. I like versatility, so we can play lots of different stuff. I like a guitar player who knows how to play with other musicians, doesn't play too much. I mean, that was what I learned how to play with a Motown band, was to lay back, that I didn't have to play too much. Even if I was the front man and singing some stuff, I didn't have to play that much. The audience likes it better when you don't. Every once in a while, you can play something pretty cool. Teaneck, New Jersey. I have a good friend in Teaneck. Something patient and easy to get along with. Yeah. So the other thing, some other things that I think are good, Mike, are somebody who knows how to read a chart and to write, without going too crazy, and somebody who shows up on time, right? If they don't have a giant amp, if they don't have to bring in their giant amp and lots of equipment, they're probably your guy. Pete Thorne. Pete Thorne's a great player. Yeah, he'd be a good guy. Steve Lukather. I don't know. Steve's kind of out there, but to his credit, I mean, you listen to Toto, he can sing, right? He could write, and he's on a lot of songs. And he goes nuts on some of those songs, right? On the Tubes, Talk to You Later, he's going nuts and playing all over. But most of the time, studio players are not called on to do that. They have to play in the music. David Smith says Johnny Marr. Johnny Marr's a heck of a player. Good team player. Yeah, I think that's what you want, right? You want somebody who's going to be a good team player, right? He's on Olivia Newton-John's Let's Get Physical. Did not know that. He's on a ton of stuff. Boz Skaggs. Yeah, he's great. Lukather is good. Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick either Lukather or Larry Carlton, I'd pick Larry Carlton every time by a mile. But Lukather was an incredible player. Is an incredible player. I just like Larry Carlton's play better. He plays more like a piano. He plays, he plays a lot of these. Let me see if I can do this. A lot of these sort of spread chords. He does it all the time and can do it really quick. But like, let me turn this on. Let's see if I can get this. Oh, like stuff like that a piano player would play. I only know majors and stuff like that, but like stuff like or stuff like that. Kind of interesting stuff, I think. Anyway, gospel sort of chord voicings. Yeah. I mean, Lukather was highly influenced by Larry Carlton. And, one thing that's really interesting about Larry Carlton, I just love his attitude with a guitar player. He basically says, if you listen to it and you like how it sounds, just do it until you can play it. Do it until it's how you sound. And so that's how he did it with the piano. I mean, you should see his hands. Like, they're always like this, but he can move incredibly fast with these super spread voicings. How do you do it? You do it by doing it every day. That's how you do it. There's no other way. Yeah. My Maria by B.W. Stevenson is Larry. Yeah. His voice never recovered after he was shot. That's right. I forgot he was shot. Well, but Mike, when was he shot? Because I got to tell you, I mean, look, I give credit to everybody doing this stuff. Larry's a great, great, great player, great guitar player. But, you know, in the 70s, he was doing his own thing and he was being a front man, right? And he sang a lot of his stuff. There's a great recording of him at the album is called Larry Carlton Live at My Father's Place in New York City. It's and he does most of his classics on there. He does Room 3335 and so forth. I don't know if he does Smiles and Smiles Ahead, but you know, some other stuff. Don't Give It Up. Anyway, he does a song just called Blues, and it's got probably one of the greatest blues solos at the end. But man, he can't sing. It's almost embarrassing how he's singing. I feel so bad for him, actually. He must have listened to that and go, oh, that's cringy. And it's too bad. It's not like it's off key, so it's on key, but it's just not working. And yeah. So it was in Long Island. Is that right? Cool. Yeah. Room 335 is great. There is an awesome video that you can look up on YouTube that has Larry Carlton and Luke are both playing on Room 335. And to point out my observation from before, Larry Carlton makes a mistake in one of those, which who cares? I don't care if he makes a mistake. I don't care if he makes a mistake here and there. It's great. But I mean, his tone and his note choice, outstanding. Lukather plays a lot more sort of chromatic lines. And his tone is a little harder edged. I don't prefer it. Again, they're both great. They're both great. I feel like I'm criticizing Lukather if I say I like Larry Carlton better, but to me, hands down, Larry Carlton is one of the all-time greats, and Lukather is also, but I think he's not quite at that same pinnacle, personally. Yeah, is that right? My Father's Place. So he's playing a lot more at the Baked Potato, I understand, and or he played recently on Baked Potato. So yeah. Pete Thorne is a great player. I agree. Pete Thorne has some real nice things. He's a great player. There's an instrumental that he does that's really nice. The jazz players are more on the fringe and are not afraid to improvise out of the box and make mistakes. Yeah, I think that's good. But you know, Mike, the rock players from the '60s, like Clapton and Duane Allman and Jimmy, you know, when I and Jimmy Page and Beck, they were out there, and Frampton too. Frampton chooses safer notes, but he's improvising all the time, and you know, he's not playing that same solo. Listen, you know, look up a bunch of Do You Feel Like We Do solos. They're all different. They're not radically different. They're similar, but they're all good, man. They're all good. Womp womp womp. What's that? G-Mac. Lyrics and vocal melody guy first and foremost. If they have a good guitar player mixed in, all the better, but the words and vocal melody. Yep. Marvin. Oh, I see Ron. Ron Shack coming through with the joke. Marvin Gaye knew his father would shoot him. He heard it through the grapevine. You know what's pathetic? Marvin Gaye gave his father that gun for like a birthday present or something like that. I don't know. I think that's now. Look, I don't want to get political on this channel, but if you're Marvin Gaye, I mean, think about it. You know, what's going on. What's he singing about, right? And then he buys his father a gun, and he shoots him. It's sadder than sad. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, sadder than sad. Frampton's hero was Kenny Burrell. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Frampton clearly was a modal player. He knew what he was doing. Dwayne Allman too. Dwayne Allman knew how to play. Like he knew music theory. He wasn't a guy who was, he may not have been an all theory all the time guy, but he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. Yeah, his father was nuts. I hope not Frampton's. So I heard Frampton is not going to play anymore. I heard like he's got this progressive disease. Yeah, I saw he was interviewed by Beato. Lucky dog. Dickie Betts is done too. So does Frampton say that he's got this muscle disease in the interview with Beato? I heard it from a friend. Anyway, it's a shame, but all things must pass, as George Harrison said. Hey, I just realized Geert isn't here today. Geert wasn't able to make it, apparently. All right, anyway, I think, yeah, it really is. As Betty Davis said, getting old ain't for sissies. Cannabis is the cure. Yeah. Yeah. Dickie can't play anymore either. After the accident that he had, definitely knew his theory. Okay, got it. Yeah, got it. Yeah, Dickie was a great player. Dickie was a great player. Allman Brothers had two of the best. I mean, Dwayne's one of the all-times. I had Dwayne on a number of comparisons, but we're gonna move on. Hey, all right, gang. This has been a lot of fun. Frampton speaks to his medical problems in an issue of one of the guitar mags. He says he's taking experimental treatment to get better. Okay. Well, wish him luck. I wish him luck because he could still play for sure. He could still play. All right, everybody. We'll see you all later. I'm going to take off. I got to get going. I got some honeydew things on my list, and I got a trip next week, the next few weeks. I may have to cancel one or the next few weeks because I'm on the road, but we'll see. All right. See you later. Have a great Sunday. As always, thanks for sharing it with me. Bye-bye.